Welcome. Welcome, everyone. It's Angelo Robles. Today, sanctuary cities and countries with a sovereign strategist. Today features David Lesperance, a good friend. I've known David for years, founder of Lesperance Associates, a global thought leader on sovereign fluidity, residency optionality, and tax arbitrage. It's an increasingly volatile world. Wealthy families need more than just broadly wealth planning. They really need, in my opinion, strategic optionality across multiple jurisdictions. David specializes in helping these ultra high net worth families and family offices navigate the complexities, and they are complex, of global mobility, citizenship, tax strategies, ensuring they're always prepared, protected, and positioned to thrive. David, welcome back to the show.
Pleasure to be here again, Angela.
So, for all of you wondering, one, I've interviewed David probably about 3 or 4 times in the last couple of years. This is a subject that I absolutely adore and love. And why I'm bringing it back a little bit to about a month ago, when I reached out to David, I was watching John Wick, the parts 1, 2, and 3. I love the movie. And it fascinated me with the word sanctuary. And in that example of John Wick, for those of you that's seen it, the sanctuary hotel, the one spot where, in theory, not going to say it always holds true, the one spot where no one's supposed to get whacked or anything's supposed to go wrong. And I do wonder, are we one day going to have what I deem to be a sanctuary city? But I'm not going to ask David that question yet, and little nuances to it. We are going to save that to the end, and I have some unique twist on that. So that's my hook. It's my hook that you got to stay with us for another Angelo long form interview, but not one of my 3-hour interviews, I promise. David, on that note, we have so much to cover. So why don't we get to it? What are some of the top factors that very, very wealthy families and their family offices should consider when choosing effectively a sanctuary or an other optionality and diversity in their country of residency, citizenship, and effectively domicile of certain resources?
Well, there are two Chinese curses. One that I don't think people will argue we are in, which is may you live in interesting times. The second Chinese curse is may you come to the attention of the emperor. And so depending on where the families are located, in some countries, for example, in China or Saudi Arabia or Russia or even Mexico, and some people would feel who are not great fans of Donald Trump, the United States, that they are not only living in interesting times, but that they may come to the attention of the emperor as a curse. And so when I'm speaking with families, they have a variety of different reasons why they have concerns. And I've been using this analogy for a while, which is a little dangerous for a Canadian to use to an American. But I tell my clients, imagine you live in a wildfire zone. So, of course, in the last year, and in the last several years, the United States has had a number of different wildfire concerns. So one that was a big one leading up to the election was the taxation of unrealized capital gains, but also anti-Semitism or racism, mass shootings, political polarization. So clients will have a variety and often a combination of different wildfire concerns. So what do you do if you live in a wildfire zone? Well, I'm gonna fight the fire. I'm gonna vote. I'm gonna lobby. I'm gonna make political donations, and that's great. Do that. But what happens if the wildfire gets out of control? It's called a wildfire for a reason. No chief drops a crew into a hot zone without having a fire insurance and a fire escape plan. And so fire insurance, I'm giving the analogy to these clients, is a second residence or citizenship. And fire escape plans tend to come in kind of three types. One I'll call the go bag option. Oh my God, there's been a hurricane or a literal wildfire in LA. I need to leave my current home for a period of time, maybe longer than 2 weeks, but not so long I'm going to be tax resident somewhere else. The second is Americans living abroad. I'm going to take my family. We're going to go and live somewhere for the next 4 years because I don't like the current administration, or until things, get under control in the areas I'm concerned. But I'm going to be an American citizen with unique citizenship-based taxation, but I'm going to be interacting with a foreign tax jurisdiction. And I did my first U.S. expatriation in 1990, so I've got 3.5 decades at this, of expatriating, properly and legally leaving the U.S. tax system.
David, you leave a lot there on the table, so we have so much to uncover. And by the way, for the audience, becoming more global than ever before, and I greatly appreciate it. Yes, some of this is going to be applicable to really everyone, but to U.S. families of great wealth. And yes, we understand the tax arbitrage aspect of remaining a U.S. citizen or green card holder and having other optionality is not going to be the tax arbitrage. That does not mean that there's not incredible value to having optionality, residency, citizenship, and resources offshore. Audiences that have heard me for many years know about consulting assignments I've done relative to this subject and a lot of work around sovereign risk. So it absolutely is important for Americans, but for practically everyone else out there that doesn't have quite the onerous system of the IRS, there is way more tax arbitrage and optionality with playing that game right. And we'll get into a combination of that as well with David. So you hinted at it with Trump and others, but how do political changes like the US elections impact global mobility strategies? Now, the irony is, David, we could have a little chuckle. Trump comes into office. There's going to be certain people, we see Ellen DeGeneres and others, that are looking to get out. But if it was the other way around, meaning Biden or someone they deem to be far left, there would be people looking to get out from that perspective as well. So no matter who gets elected, there's going to be people on the other side that feel that doom or other uncomfortableness, for lack of a better word, may come. And I don't know if I want to expatriate, but I want to have optionality. So no matter who gets elected, there's always going to be some people.
Right. Just because you have fire insurance and a fire escape plan doesn't mean you have to trigger it. It just means that if you personally feel, things are getting a little too warm, you've got that insurance and you've got the comfort of that insurance of knowing. And sometimes we'll have some family members leave. We'll have other family members that stay behind. It's really giving your family optionality, and having a second citizenship is something that you can pass on. It's not just for you and your family, it's also for, future generations. If you think for example, in both of our cases, our ancestors made a choice to leave somewhere and come to, in your case, the United States, in my case, Canada, and that had a profound effect not only on their lives, but on that of the subsequent generations. So this is a long-term, multi-generational area to explore.
And by the way, audience, we are going to have some unique nuances actually on Canada. Ironic that David happens to have been born there. He's not there at the moment. He's in Europe. And many of you know, and I'm pretty open with my political leanings. I think it's good to be open with the audience, including the fact that we all have biases. And yes, I skew to being a libertarian who's a little bit on the conservative side. I have been critical of things I've seen in Canada, but I have some unique takes that we're going to get David's opinion on that may surprise you relative to Canada and other countries. We're going to talk a little bit about Iceland and Scandinavia. So this will be a lot of fun to stay with us. I think we both use this kind of terminology. What are the key differences between fast track and slow track, more citizenship programs? In other words, suppose a little impatient like me, what optionality could I have to get residency and or really directly citizenship? And no, I don't want to wait 4, 5, 6, 7 years. On the other hand, there may be areas that are maybe more preferred or lower cost, but I may have to wait a long amount of time. If you could share a little bit of those nuances, maybe you can't get everything you want, and how that plays out with you and your clientele.
Well, the first thing that we do whenever we have a client looking at second citizenships is we kind of mine their family history to see whether they've got a claim to a lineage citizenship. So, for example, Angela, you may have a claim to an Italian citizenship. yes, that gives you the right to live in Italy, but because Italy is part of the EU, EEA, you have a right to live not only in Italy, but 28 other countries. And so let's look at that. But lineage citizenships, I occasionally have a client say, oh, I have an Irish grandmother. I'll just pick up an Irish passport. Well, it's not like you dial 1-800-I-AM-IRISH and a leprechaun delivers a passport to you. There's a process. And do you have can you prove it? Do you have the appropriate documentation, not to satisfy somebody at the Thanksgiving table, but to satisfy the foreign government? So even the fastest lineage citizenship programs take a year and a half, and people may want to come faster and they look at, bridge documents. But for those who don't have the family history, it's kind of the classic, you've got three things: quality, speed, low price. Pick two. Well, the quality, as I said, because all these EU country citizenships, whether you're Italian, is just as valuable as, if you're Romanian or Maltese or Belgian, they all give the same rights. The quality is the same. So speed and process. There are some Caribbean citizenships by investments. They will have a cost now. Really, once you include government fees, legal fees, all the security check fees of about 300,000 US, but that will give you the right to live in that particular island. But if you're looking at kind of the next level up, that EU quality, you can go with, low cost, but it's going to be slow. So for example, you could get a resident status in a place like Portugal. You can either do that by moving to Portugal and spending at least 6 months there on something called a D7, or if you don't want to spend that amount of time, you need to spend at least 6 months of the year in Portugal. Great for somebody, I have 10-year-old twins, so I'm going to be somewhere 9 months of the year. So if that's going to be Portugal, I could, get a D7, no extra cost. For those who can't afford to spend the time there, then they need to go under the Golden Visa program. A lot of people think Portugal closed its Golden Visa program. What they did is they closed the real estate path, but you choose one of many 500,000 euro investments locked in for 5 years, choose the best one for return of capital, return of on investment. That's an investment decision. You plant that seed of residence in Portugal, and after 5-year naturalization period, again, you go through a process. You do have to learn some Portuguese, and you can get Portuguese citizenship. So that would be D7, would be very low cost, or Golden Visa, that really an asset reallocation. But total running time when residence processing and citizenship processing, you're looking at about 7 or 8 years. Again, a little faster. Malta says, okay, we will reduce our normal 5-year naturalization period to 3 years, or even 1 year if you make a big government contribution. Total runtime there, you're looking at 20 to 24 months, but you're looking at now sunk costs of over €1 million. Other countries have, you may be able to negotiate with countries for whatever is important to that country. So you can get you can get within a matter of 6 months citizenship in those other countries. And whether it's a philanthropic or an investment donation, those are kind of what I call bespoke citizenships that we negotiate on a kind of one-on-one basis. So again, speed and low cost. The faster you want it, the more it's going to cost you.
You may want to keep it a little close to the vest, David, and that's fine. That's your call. Maybe you do want to share one. But are there countries in Europe, EU or non-EU, I said Europe, I didn't say the Caribbean, where if I wanted to put in the amount of money that I would need to, and maybe it's even millions, but I want it fast. I want to be a citizen in 6 months. Is that possible?
Absolutely. And remember, I act on behalf of the clients. I don't act on behalf of the government. So it's the classic, the government wants some type of foreign direct investment. It varies from country to country. And my clients say, well, if I do this, am I going to get the citizenship? And on the other hand, the country's saying, if we get the citizenship, will we, will we get the foreign direct investment? So we do things such as set up escrow arrangements. In most countries have somewhere in their constitution given the power to somebody, a president, a premier, a cabinet minister, a council of ministers, the power to waive normal naturalization requirements and grant citizenship. If you're Angela, top striker on the football team, and the country wants to
30 years ago, maybe
going into the Euro and wants to get you, they have to grant you citizenship up front. You may or may not produce that gold medal, or may or may not produce that win. For these countries, they can, we set it up in an escrow type of arrangement, and it's countries kind of come and go very quickly. One of the things that's always interesting is in doing this for as long as I've been doing it, there's a couple of truisms. Number one is the price will always keep increasing. It's never going to drop. Number two is that programs come and go and are altered all the time. So I've, over the years, had many clients come back 2 years later say, okay, I'm finally ready to go in this program. And I have to tell them, well, that program closed 8 months ago. So it's the kind of thing for clients to figure out very, very quickly, is this fire insurance worth the premium I'm going to pay? What's the damage I'm going to suffer if I don't have this fire insurance and a fire escape plan? And so once you do that, kind of make a decision, fish or cut bait, because there's no guarantee that same fire insurance policy is going to be available 6 months from now, even 3 months from now.
And David, what are some of the nuances, differences, ease, time, money of residency versus citizenship, or residency initially to decide whether you even want to become a citizen?
So one of the kind of good things that came out of the pandemic is the development of this thing called the digital nomad visa. And generally when people think of digital nomads, they think of some recent college graduate with a laptop and a backpack, in a beachside cafe somewhere. But it's basically, if you can remotely work, you can go as a digital nomad. They're fast, they're cheap. And so in kind of 6 to 8 weeks, I can get you a digital nomad visa, which will give you a year, or in some countries up to 3 years there. Now you have to meet certain criteria: medical insurance, no police record, sufficient monies to take care of. And countries do this because you're a high-end tourist. You're going to be, the cost to the government fee may be low, but you're going to be sitting in the cafe, paying VAT tax on that espresso and that croissant. And so they get benefits of having you in the country with no extra burden on the country. Those we often get as bridge documents, even for people who have a lineage citizenship claim. For the people who are getting residence permits, whether that's under a retirement visa or a startup visa or an investment golden visa, for example, Spain is just closing their program. We use these, it's a combination of statuses that we use to kind of put together the proper plan for the client. And these plans need to be integrated with the tax planning. So next week, for example, I'm doing a webinar, very technical one, on what happens when settlers of trust or beneficiaries of trust who are Americans move out of the United States. What are the accounting, what are the filing obligations of that quite significant event? Because if you don't pay attention to those things, what you're going to pay me or getting one of these statuses is a rounding error compared to stepping on that financial landmine.
Oh, yes, of course, of course. And going back to question prior, when I noted for someone with the resources that wants to move very quick, and I know it's important for you to be private and discreet in a variety of different ways, but would there be a EU or European country in general that you could mention where that, let's call it fast strategy, could work? And if you don't mind, on my own assumption and some of the work I've done in the last couple of years, could I throw out a country in Europe that's a little off the beaten path that may qualify for what I described?
Well, it's an interesting thing. So Brussels does not, EU does not like the concept of residence or citizenship by investment. So they just don't. Whether that's based in fact or prejudice is irrelevant. They don't. The question is, do they have any power, or is this an area of national concern? And so the Malta had a very public program, has a very public program, and the EU is saying, we don't like it, we're going to challenge you in court. Well, in the middle of last year, the lawyer for the EU said, yeah, we're going to lose this. It is what's called ultra vires. It's beyond the power of the EU. Now, sure, Brussels couldn't tell Malta who to give and who not to give citizenship to, but Brussels could also say, yeah, Malta, that highway we were going to fund, we're going to take another year or so to do that. So they don't have direct influence or power over the area of who a country grants citizenship to, but they have indirect we have ways of trying to influence you. So other countries have said, these programs, whether it's residence or citizenship by investment, are a great way of developing foreign direct investment, but we don't want to poke the Brussels bear. So we are going to exercise our sovereign power to who to give citizenship to. For example, France gave citizenship to a gentleman that climbed a burning building and saved a toddler. Greece gave citizenship to Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson. The Austrians gave citizenship to one of my clients who they thought could win a gold medal for them at the Olympics. So countries have this power. Question is, under what circumstances will they issue that power? And I don't really want to publicly say which countries I'm dealing with, because then I'd be breaking my promise to them not to poke the Brussels bear. So unlike Malta, which had their prime minister standing up in front of big conferences saying Malta is open for business, which poked Brussels bear, these countries don't really want to do that. But it's an EU, same quality, but it's going to be much faster because they haven't got the bureaucracy, but it's going to be a higher price.
Indeed. And I do have one in mind. I guess we'll keep it a little close to the vest. And those of you interested could always reach out to me and or David direct, or I'm happy to make an introduction to David where, again, non-recorded like we're doing now in more of a public platform, it'll be a little more discreet. You mentioned lineage before. I mean, let's use Angelo, myself, a little bit as an example, like you did. So let's see. My mother and grandmother of Italian heritage, but were born here in the U.S. My great-grandmother was born in Italy. Is that going back too far?
It could work. There's a question of whether there's an intervening event. So you have to look at Italy, like many countries, will either have had previously a maternal or a paternal kind of line. And so your great-grandmother is little quirks like, did she become naturalized in a foreign country, happened to be the United States? And when did that occur and under what law? So what we do is we gather the information. Whenever we have somebody who may have a lineage claim, what we do is we gather a bunch of information. I then work with local counsel on all of these things. We have decision trees and we run it through the decision tree. So hurdle number one is, do you theoretically qualify? And you may very well theoretically qualify, Angela. So we would go through that kind of process. The second is, okay, you theoretically qualify. Do we have the documents to prove it? Now that may be a combination of, going through shoe boxes in ADEX or engaging professional genealogists to find out if we have the documentation. And if so, we've cleared the second hurdle. And the third is making the actual application. So some countries have language requirements. So for example, Romania is just bringing in a law that will impose a language requirement on a lot of lineage citizenships. Other countries don't. So we then look at, military service. There isn't any other of the European countries that have citizenship or citizenship-based taxation, but we look at some countries don't allow dual citizenship. So they would force you to give up, your existing citizenship. So we look at kind of all these nuances. Now, the advantage, Angelo, of doing a lineage citizenship from an ancestor is not only would you qualify, but your siblings and cousins and uncles and aunts. And so once we've done the research on step 1 and step 2, oftentimes we can use that for a large number of family members.
And since it was coming up a little bit later, but since we're on the Italy as an example, we might as well stick with it. Italy has become more attractive. You'll help elaborate in the last couple of years. Forget my perspective in terms of lineage. There are some people that feel that it may have turned the corner politically. You could make your own perspective. From me being a little bit more of a libertarian who skews conservative, I think Meloni current is a wonderful choice, and let's see how that plays out. But it shows some promise. Italy's going to have just iconic architecture, culture, and food. It also has rather legendary bureaucracy. It has parts of it that are going to be very, very frustrating and are going to be slow to change. Now, I don't mean to get too dark, but for those that feel that Switzerland is like the ultimate hub if things go to hell in a handbasket, Italy, partially depending on what part of Italy you're in, is relatively close and you don't need a plane to get there. So Italy, I think, does check the box from many different perspectives. Oh, and a really important one, quote unquote, it's tax holiday, which for someone that has a US citizenship or green card, I get it. This is really not going to be applicable to you. But if you could talk a little bit about all that, Italy as an option and how Italy did adapt and has upped its amount via its quote unquote tax holiday.
Well, interestingly, so the U.S. election, of course, was beginning of November. On October 30th, the U.K. finance minister, it's called the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, made an announcement, quite a significant announcement, to change a centuries-old tax laws starting in April, getting rid of something called the remittance, or what's commonly called the non-dom system. So you had all these wealthy foreigners living in London who are being driven out. And so again, the higher the net worth you have, the less likely you need to be in a specific location to make or maintain this wealth. So we had a particular client who said, okay, David, it looks like Labor is going to win, which they did in July. What's the worst case scenario? I said, well, they get rid of the remittance base and they get rid of some trust laws called the excluded property trust. He goes, well, what does that mean to me? He said, well, the UK is going to, your tax situation is going to be, on income, you're going to be moved from being taxed only on UK source or territorial to global. I don't care. I don't generate income. Okay. Capital gains will move from territorial to global. I don't sell things. I just borrow against them. Oh, and they're going to want 40% of your worldwide assets and inheritance tax. To which he responded, London's nice. It isn't that nice. And so we looked at what jurisdictions would work for them. He could, how much time he was going to spend in the future in the UK. They have something, the Americans may be familiar with, the significant presence test. They have a substantial residence test similar in the UK, how many midnights you can spend before you're deemed. Italy has a tax treaty. You can spend more midnights. Okay. What about Italy? What a lump sum. And then it was 100,000. Now it's 200,000 euros a year. Whether you make $1 or $1 billion, it's 200,000. The other advantage is, so tax becomes a line item. Says, well, that's a significant tax savings. That's what I pay my accountants every year. Said, well, okay, there's no compliance costs. You're just not people actually write checks anymore, but you're just sending them 200,000 every year. You're not paying Deloitte or Pricewaterhouse or whomever to do a return. Plus, you're not getting this thick return that you're signing your signature to going, I hope my accountant got it all right because I'm liable. So there's no anxiety. There's no compliance costs. Life is much simpler. So 200,000 to this person was a rounding error. To your average Italian, that's about 10 times the cost of what the average, or 10 times the amount the average Italian contributes in tax every year. Oh, okay. Why would Italy do this? Well, first off, if Angelo is paying a lump sum and coming to Italy, it's not like they have to pave another mile of road or hire another police officer. So the marginal cost of having you there is zero. And you're contributing for yourself and 9 others. Oh, great. Plus your consumer spending. Plus you're bringing investment dollars. Plus you're probably an entrepreneur. It's not like you're going to, you know, Warren Buffett doesn't get up in the morning because he has to cover the mortgage. That's the type of personality these people have, is they start businesses, they make investments. And so you've got one group of countries which are bringing in tax policies like the United Kingdom, which are driving out the golden geese, and other countries which are making tax and immigration policies saying, come land here. So that movement is definitely happening. So when people say this is happening in Europe, well, no, there's a huge variation of countries. Some are driving out the golden geese, some are welcoming them.
David, talk a little bit about, and again, maybe more applicable to non-US citizens that want to be careful not to get looped into the tax system of a given country, but are interested in access there, resources, maybe even business interest, a house, residency, but want to be careful not to loop into the tax system. They may love Scandinavia and many of the countries in it, but don't like the tax structure there. How could they be nuanced, having those resources and having optionality there, but not getting tied into the tax structures?
Well, the US is unique in not only having citizenship-based taxation, but automatically making somebody a taxpayer when they have an immigration status. So if you look at the different definition of who's a US person for tax purposes, it's citizen or green card holder or somebody who's spent too much time there and triggers the substantial presence test. So you can get a digital visa, you can get a residence visa in a variety of countries, but unless you spend 6 months of the year plus there, you're not going to be tax resident. And 6 different European countries actually have quite favorable tax regimes. So Ireland, Malta, and Cyprus have that non-dom remittance basis that the UK is just getting out of. Some countries have lump sum. Italy, we've talked about. Greece also. Switzerland, they call it a forfait fiscal. The amount is negotiated in each canton. Other countries have special regimes. For example, they've just closed Portugal. They've just closed the non-habitual residence regime. But for those who want kind of a deep dive for Americans moving there, on my website, I've got a 90-minute webinar with the top US and top Portuguese tax lawyer on what kind of the issues would be there. Also a UK tax lawyer. And so it's really understanding, A, can I get what I want without becoming a taxpayer? And B, even if I become a taxpayer, which I may want to do because I want to use that as a shield against another country, that tiebreaker rule I talked about. So it's understanding all of those things and picking the right jurisdiction. And you mentioned earlier you're a libertarian. I'm not quite sure what to define myself as, maybe an extreme libertarian, in that I don't trust or particularly like politicians generally. And maybe that's a good thing, but what I do is organize my life and organize that of my clients so that they take advantage of things that a jurisdiction will have while sheltering themselves from the downside. So for example, I may not like the US tax system, but I want to invest in Apple. I can do that without being a US taxpayer. I may want may want medical coverage. Fine, that's a commodity I can buy. I mean, Canadians, I get free healthcare. No, you don't. You pay a premium every tax year, and the benefits you get, your premium increases depending on your income, but your benefits don't increase. So I look at what are all the things I need, the positive things in my life, without, whether that's a travel document, whether that's particular access. But, again, where I physically at may not necessarily be where my money or my investments are. And you've got a mature audience, so I'll use the politically incorrect. I tell my clients oftentimes their assets aren't where their ass is.
Yes, we're going to get into a little bit of that too in terms of having domicile, having citizenship doesn't necessarily mean you need to have all your resources there. And that applies as well to US citizens. We'll see about our timing on that. A little bit macro, big picture, when you're kind of looking at this from a global perspective, if I'm a family of wealth and resources, even based in the US, I'm probably looking at a variety of factors at a country, including things like its infrastructure, its rule of law, stability, and of course, you got broad culture, architecture, food, and how about a very simple, am I happy there? Like that, that actually, of all the other things I'm talking about, maybe at the end of the day, that's most important. How do you help your clients who are, I'm assuming, are intelligent, but think through a little bit before they make a big decision that, and you said it earlier, what may be a good option now may, and you hinted at this for yourself, may not be a good option a year from now or 5 years from now. How do I evaluate different options? Do I need to keep optionality open? And do I need to do this every 1 or 3 years?
Well, occasionally I'll get a client who said, look, I've been sued, I've been audited, I've gone through a divorce, move me somewhere where there's no lawyers and there's no tax system. And kind of my snarky answer is, no problem. We'll move you to Pitcairn Island in the Pacific. Only 38 people have decided that that's where they want to live. Oh, no, no. I need schools, hospitals, international travel, good restaurants. Say, okay. So I would say probably 4/5 of my clients don't move to, small islands, although some do, but most of them say, when I look at all my family and personal needs and preferences, they tend to move them to what are thought of as high tax countries, but on a lower controlled tax basis. So for example,
Good
if
point.
you're, people, I'm going to move to the island of Sark in the Channel
Yes.
Islands. And well, Sark is a very nice place for a weekend, but there's no cars. It's very small. There's 3 pubs. That's not going to kind of, if you're moving from Manhattan to Sark, that's not going to work. So you got to look at what are all the family needs and what are going to do it, because you have to have all the members of the family live the plan. Especially if you're driven by tax, tax is a percentage of income. If your spouse isn't happy and you get a divorce is a percentage of capital. So I have this discussion with a lot of Americans who look at Puerto Rico and they say, well, they got a great tax system, Act 60. Absolutely. But is your family going to want to live in Puerto Rico? It's quite a big lifestyle change from the island of Manhattan to the island of Puerto Rico.
Be a little nice,
And
David. That's the other part of my cultural heritage.
yeah, no, I mean, I have Puerto Rican clients who love the place. But again, what's right for you and your family? That's kind of the first choice. Then we start asking questions like, okay, if you're an American, are you going to be an American living there, or are you going to be not an American, either because you never were an American or we've expatriated you? What are you going to spend time somewhere back in the old country? Do we need to have a tax treaty? For example, those fleeing non-doms, if they go to Italy or Dubai or a variety of countries, they have tax treaties with the UK, so they can spend more time in the UK. But if they move to Monaco, Monaco doesn't have a tax treaty, so they don't have that benefit. So we look at kind of what first will sell at the breakfast table, what will meet everybody's needs, and then how can we do that as efficiently as possible, what will sell at the boardroom table. So that's kind of the planning process.
Well, I promised, David, I would come back to your country of birth, Canada, our northern neighbor here, quote unquote, being based in the US. And again, I don't mean to make it overly political, but when I saw Trudeau's actions over many years and feel that it's not been to the betterment of Canada from my perspective, and the truck driver episode, and I know I'm simplifying it, and the threat of freezing their accounts, the threat of freezing family and friends that would help, and the very subtle threats. Admittedly, none of them follow through, I understand, but that, maybe you're not a fit parent and we could also take your children are very, very concerning. Yes, I understand it didn't come to fruition. Yes, I understand Trudeau will be out very, very shortly, but this is the whole thing about politics, politicians, they change, and you may need to keep quote unquote fluidity. But the big picture I'm getting at, which may surprise people, even when Trudeau looked like he would be there what feels to be forever, if you're based in the US, I would still consider some level of optionality in Canada in case things were to go really wrong here. One, you could get there in theory without getting on a plane, so it's local. And Northwest Canada is very, very remote. Now, broadly speaking, not to make it a geopolitical conversation, others have mentioned this as well. Canada is huge. Canada has incredible natural resources. In theory, Canada has all the raw ingredients to be one of the greatest countries on earth. Now, some would argue that maybe it is. It's not for me to decide. But what I am saying is, if I don't want to tie myself up in the Canadian tax system and I want to have optionality in Canada, especially as an American, what could I do?
So Canada became a tool I was reaching for in the toolbox quite a bit over the last few years. And one of the things, Angelo, while I'm a Canadian, while I've been observing, as PBS would say, the American experience my entire life, I'm completely agnostic and unconflicted with regards to jurisdictions, which one works for my clients. I don't take commissions from islands or from Greek property developers or from Portuguese fund managers. So I look at, so when we were using Canada, well, Canada for Americans who had different wildfire concerns over the last few years, there's a trade agreement between Canada and the US. So if you're a professional or a business owner, we can very quickly get you a work permit in Canada. Simply, and that would give you the right to spend as 100% of the time during that work permit. And under that agreement, you could renew that endlessly. But unless you spend more than 6 months of the year physically in Canada, you never become tax resident. Oh, so I had clients who said, well, I want a bug out option. We had some clients years ago from Houston who had set something up in Toronto, and when the hurricane came, they literally bugged out, and it was about 3 or 4 months before things got back to normal back in Houston, and they flew out. But if you remember the timing of that hurricane, it was in August. They were able to kind of fly the family out, get the kids in school, do everything. The kids remained resident and became tax resident in Canada. The kids didn't earn any income, so there was no hit on the family wealth. So it's that kind of planning. So Canada is very useful for that kind of insurance policy.
Yes.
Fairly quick. It's fairly inexpensive to do for the right. If the client's got the right combination, that's great. If you're a ditch digger and not a business owner or a professional, it's going to be tough. But Canada, for the types of audience that we have here, is certainly an option to kind of add into the portfolio of fire insurance that they have.
Of course. So I would completely agree. Let's go a little bit around the world. And let's go to an area that I think has gotten very trendy from a tax perspective, which again is not going to be applicable to US citizens, but from people around the world. Probably the most common area that I'm hearing about now is the United Arab Emirates. Could be Abu Dhabi, more from a business and family office perspective, Dubai, a little bit more personal. I have my own perspective, tax-wise, incredible. Great, talented people in the world of finance and professional services, banking, etc. My problem, and this is maybe being a hardcore libertarian, is where it just bites me in the butt, is at the end of the day, it is a kingdom. And the king could change their mind. The king could eventually pass away. I don't know how things could change, but in some ways, is that really any different than many other places? So trying to keep an open mind of the positive and the negative, how would you look at for a non-US citizen, but you could throw in a US citizen as well without the tax arbitrage, the United Arab Emirates?
So I first went to the Emirates in 1990. My partner lived there for 25 years.
Wow.
So we know the good, the bad, and the ugly of all the different Emirates. And so Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Russell Cayman, Al Ain, these are all Emirates within the United Arab Emirates. There are some excellent things about the UAE. You touched on one of the fundamental issues, which is if the emir wakes up on the wrong side of the bed or doesn't like you personally, things can change very quickly. So they have tried to bring in rule of law, and they brought in arbitration laws and internet cities and all kinds of different things, which are great. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, those can all go out the window at the whim of the leaders. Dubai has certainly over those 35 years developed a lot of the infrastructure of life, professionals, shopping, schools, entertainment. When I first started going, Emirates had 2 planes. Now it's one of the biggest and best airlines in the world. So a lot of those things. I'm about to go to a holiday in Qatar for my kids' holiday to an all-inclusive resort. The last time I was in Qatar was in 1992, when there was only one kind of decent hotel. So these places have developed. And the Emirates have also developed a tax treaty network. I mentioned, for example, the one with the UK. There's also one with the US. So for clients, even those who've expatriated but who have ongoing US source income, they get a reduced rate under the tax treaty. So there's all kinds of little tools. But at the end of the day, can you sell it at the breakfast table? Is that going to work? Now, if you're worried about, financially things changing with the Emir, again, as I mentioned, where you are may not necessarily be where your assets are. So you can arbitrage the good things and the bad things.
Of course. And I think the audience, whenever I have you on, always finds this a little bit exciting and enticing. Well, maybe I'll name a couple of countries that are diverse around the world, and maybe we'll go 2 minutes effectively on each. Then we'll get back to a lot of questions I have, including my John Wick theory, by the way. So it's coming, I promise everyone. I think we already kind of covered a little bit, 2 minutes on Ireland and Italy. We did a little bit there on United Arab Emirates. Portugal is still one that I hear so many people talk about. You mentioned the Golden Visa program and then effectively the non-Golden Visa program. In the 2 minutes, we're going to go around maybe 4 or 5 different countries. Give me a little bit of the good and bad from a family of wealth and resources about Portugal.
Portugal, digital nomad visa, so we can get you status there very quickly. The next question is, how much time are you going to spend there? If you're going to spend more than 6 months, then we go under the very cheap D7. If you're going to spend less than 6 months there, then we go on the golden visa. If you're going to be there more than 6 months, then you're going to be looking at the Impatica tax regime, which is the replacement for the non-habitual tax regime. Again, as an American, it's basically globally tax neutral to you. For foreigners, if you fit in a particular category, it could be quite tax advantageous. Lovely country, lots of English speaking, lots of infrastructure, etc.
Great. And if you don't mind, I know you hinted at it earlier, but I could see some things are starting to come in. Give me a little bit of context, exactly what is, and maybe broadly some cost of a digital nomad visa. So it's not technically residency. I'm not getting a citizenship. What am I getting for it, and how much does it cost?
Well, let's put some nomenclature. So think of a digital nomad visa as kind of like a temporary membership card in Club Portugal. Think of residence, whether you get that through the D7 or the Golden Visa, as junior membership in Club Portugal, and senior membership would be citizenship. So you could endlessly renew the temporary membership card under digital nomads. It'll never make its way up to citizenship. In order to get citizenship, you have to have junior membership, then graduate to senior membership. So a digital nomad, for example, your sunk costs, paying me, local council, government fees, etc., would be for a couple about 15,000 US. We would need to show that you had adequate medical insurance, clear police record, and that you've got access to funds either ongoing or access to wealth, a fairly minimal amount. We'd want to see access to about 40,000 euros a year. Euro is fairly close to the US dollar these days.
Okay. And Portugal, you mentioned, is a country that would do that. If you could maybe note two or three others.
So Italy, as I mentioned, has a digital nomad. Our costs and the fees are pretty much the same. Italy is trying to shoot at a kind of a higher level of digital nomad. So they would want to see, for example, 60,000 euros a year access to that information. And again, in Europe, different places. Ireland has an independent means, which is kind of like the D7. It's like a retirement visa, 5-year naturalization period, remittance tax basis. Switzerland, you can go and get what are called their B or C permits, or if you get one of these citizenships. So I've got some clients who are buying that fast but expensive citizenship, and then going from a tax point of view and going and living in Switzerland because it's one of the 29 countries you can live in as a national of an EU country. Greece has a lump sum. It's still 100,000. They have a golden visa residence program where you actually purchase a residence, which is important because if you're going to go live there, you want to sleep somewhere. So you can use the acquisition of your home as your means of getting residence.
That's very helpful, David. And how about Spain?
Spain is interesting. Spain had a golden visa program, which they are just closing at the end of this month. They also announced yesterday that they are going to impose 100% tax on non-Europeans, such as our Americans that we're talking about, or the Brits who buy properties there. It's a political play. For those people, if they want to look me up on LinkedIn, I posted yesterday something about this. I'll be in Barron's. I was just quoted for an article. It'll probably come out in the next few days on it. So Spain is a country which is, again, getting rid of the golden geese. They have something called the Beckham rule, which people talk about, named after the famous footballer. Sorry, soccer player. I've been in Europe too long. And David Beckham. But that can kind of, again, that's fine for kind of, the working person or the mass affluent, the higher net worth. It just doesn't take you very far. Now, one quirk that Spain does have that's interesting to my Mexican clients who were fleeing AMLO and the current, or anybody from Latin America or any part of the former Spanish or Portuguese Empire, is that the naturalization period is reduced from 5 years to 2 years, which is quite attractive. You have a language requirement, but again, Latin Americans tend to speak Spanish anyway, and stuff. But you have to be physically present there, which means you're going to be tax resident there. And as certain Colombian pop stars and footballers have found out, the Spanish tax authorities are nasty. They will go after you. So Spain's a bit of a mixed bag. Beautiful country, lots of great places, but is it going to work for you both at the breakfast table and at the boardroom table?
And let's talk about some countries that are probably not the most tax friendly. So you're not doing it for that per se, but having optionality and including where you live, it doesn't all come down to taxes. Like you said, there's advanced strategies if you're not producing much income. There's loans against your assets and resources. And at the end of the day, you also want to be safe and happy, and that may be worth it for you. Which turns my attention to a country like Iceland, kind of quasi off the grid. Maybe if things go to hell in a handbasket, that would be an area that some would deem to be safe. So why don't we start there and maybe give it the 2-minute treatment like we did some of the others?
Sure. Iceland, lovely country. If people have not visited, I would recommend put that on their bucket list. You have to appreciate the entire country is only 350,000 people. It is a highly educated, very literate society. They have some interesting quirks. For example, there's no such thing as spousal support in their divorce law. because they feel women would say, why would I need money from a man? And so they never incorporated that. You can live there. It's difficult to get Irish or Icelandic citizenship or even an Icelandic residence permit, but you can get citizenship in another one of the EU countries and have the right to live there. From a tax point of view, it again, if you structure it properly, can be quite efficient. It has so if you're worried about the event, rather than kind of burying yourself in a double wide trailer in Kansas, you can go to Iceland. It's got geothermal electricity, fresh fish. You'll have geothermal electricity that can, have your greenhouse and grow your food, and it is not generally in the path of wars. So, it could be a place. New Zealand is a similar type of thing, and a lot of people have talked about going to New Zealand in a similar way. You'll read these clickbait stories about all these tech billionaires having hidden bunkers in New Zealand, and there's a guy in Texas that sells these things that claims that, and to which I apply Occam's razor and I say, okay, let me get this straight. You're going to get a double wide trailer. You're going to take it from Austin, Texas to Port of Los Angeles. You're going to put it on a boat because it's not going to fit on a normal container. You're going to send it across the Pacific. You're going to get off Auckland or Queenston, North or South Island. You're going to get this double wide, take it off this unique boat through the roads. So you're going to have, block off the roads. You're going to get it there, and you're going to bury it in an undisclosed location. And nobody along that entire thousands of mile path will have had, one of these to take a picture or video of this. And you claim you've done this 8 times. Do we think that's likely? Or do we think you're engaging in a bit of puffery? And why would I need to do it? If I simply get on a plane, my private plane or Air New Zealand, and fly to New Zealand, get a property there, have a nice property. My neighbors are also not distressed, so I don't need to hire a whole bunch of Navy SEALs to protect me from my neighbors. This is not Mad Max or anything, although that was Australian. It's just, so I have lots of clients who, when they consider, buying a place in a missile silo or something, it's like, just buy a place in a remote place, get a right to get there, and you'll be safer and happier. I mean, I love my family, but I don't want to be buried in a double wide trailer or a missile silo for months on end with them.
And there's
my neighbors are going to shoot up the place to steal our tin peaches.
There's other thoughts and consultative work that I do on the sovereign risk issue that addresses a little bit about your issue that you brought up in terms of strategy, in terms of residence and or bunker. And the reality depends on what. Like, are you talking about a solar flare, a nuclear war, significant civil unrest? And being isolated, okay, but water and food sources, effectively farmland, and really does it kind of need to be a little bit part of a community? And at the end of the day, is that what it really is going to come down to, especially if you're in a bit of a remote area? It's not just you and part of a community are all chipping in and providing value, security, safety, and, Maslow's hierarchy of housing, or shelter, technically, as he describes it, water and food. When I looked at some of the U.S. military reports about where, and I know we're getting a little off topic in terms of the subject, it really came down to water, clean water access. You cannot live if you don't have a clean water to drink. After 2-3 days, you could go weeks and weeks and weeks without any food, but not without water. Now, there's other areas I could talk about around that. I'm going to keep that a little private and discreet for my members and other relationships. I have more content coming up on all that is going to be private for my membership. So simply stay tuned. Staying a little bit in greater Scandinavia, that would leave us then Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland. You don't have to go through each one, but any specific nuances on any one of them that stands out to you?
Well, we'll include Estonia there because it's right across the bay from Helsinki. So if we look at kind of the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, they have some of them have residence by investment programs. Finland, Sweden, and Norway, I'm very familiar with because I live in northern Poland on the coast, and we have ferries every day leaving our harbor with Swedes and Norwegians that come here because it's cheap and they can buy things duty free here at a fraction of the price, and things. Lovely places, very well organized. Again, you don't want to become tax resident, but if you're looking at where am I going to have, that my bug out place, should whatever my concern happen, that may be in a community in northern Manitoba, that may be in Iceland, that may be in New Zealand, that may be in one of these Scandinavian countries. And again, you can have those in reserve so that you can enjoy the time and have them kind of as second homes. But so long as if you get to the point saying, I'm going to be there for a longer period of time, at that point, you can put the pre-tax residence tax planning in place. And so you keep these things in reserve and you enjoy them as you would any type of seasonal home. And it may become a more permanent home, should certain events happen. And again, a lot of these events don't tend to be, if a comet comes and hits and changes the earth and there's going to be a new ice age, that's one thing. But a lot of these events tend to have a specific time period. Even nuclear winters are only going to last for a certain period of time. Administrations or wildfires or the looting after an earthquake or a hurricane. And so, you look for a place that's going to sustain you, longer than a long vacation, but maybe not for the rest of your life.
Of course. And you did bring up Estonia that has, as I remember, something unique relative to kind of digital citizenship. Where am I a little off on that? And where is Estonia an interesting option?
Estonia has something called a residence, an e-residence, which is very useful so it gives you an identity card. That allows you to do things such as bank and get driver's licenses and medical insurance, which is very useful. If you think of large parts of, people who are underbanked, there are people who are under residence permits. So you get a lot of it. So it's been very popular. So when Estonia, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Estonia said, well, we're a pretty small country. How are we going to, what's going to be our unique selling proposition here? And so they said, well, we're small enough where we can digitize lots of things, which had some excellent outcomes. So you had a very computer literate group. So, things like Skype and TransferWise, that all came out of Estonia. On the other side, for those people who are worried about privacy issues relating to digitization of government information, that's the balance that you have to look at. So the e-residence gives you an identity card, but it doesn't give you a right to reside in Estonia. There are, however, in Latvia, which is just south of Estonia, a residence by investment program. You make relatively cheap. You make an investment there. You get a residence permit. It is very difficult to get citizenship because you have to speak Latvian. So for all the Latvian listeners, Shveks. But why do they require that? Well, you have to remember that Riga was an open water port for the Soviet Union. So there were a lot of multi-generational Russians in Latvia that when the Soviet Union broke up and Latvia again gained its independence, it would be kind of like if Annapolis all of a sudden became French. The French would be greatly concerned about the Americans who had been for generations in Annapolis. That's kind of the geopolitical issues. Same thing in Lithuania. So you have to understand all the nuances of the geopolitical, and that's why each one of these EU countries has its own unique opportunities and downsides.
I have several more questions left. We encourage for our members and live audience today interaction. A couple of things have come in. I'll get to them in a second. Hard stop in about 15, 20 more minutes. There are certain things, as again, I like 2 or 3 hour interviews where we're just not going to have the time to cover. And some of them I have covered with David in the past, but again, things change. I would like to have done a little more on Asia. I may have a question relative to that. Singapore, a little bit more in Switzerland. I have done a full program on that about 2 years ago. And that is an interesting one. And LATAM in general, and even Puerto Rico for U.S. citizens, and tremendous tax arbitrage. We're just not likely going to have enough time. You can't cover everything. I'm looking at one of the questions that came in. Do want to be respectful for those that interact. From Andrew, he states, please comment on how new residents of these countries can hold their bank and investment accounts. He states, I understand that can be problematic.
So Americans, because of citizenship-based taxation, and in particular once FATCA was passed, found it more difficult to do everything from opening regular bank accounts to getting mortgages, etc. And that was because from the financial institution, if I was a bank and I had an American in front of me, I have a whole bunch of compliance costs and hassles, which I don't have with the Canadian or the Kiwi or the Brit or the Mexican behind them. And so when FATCA first came out, a lot of banks just said not worth the hassle and just debanked Americans. Personally, for example, I live in Poland. I last moved there from Canada, but I lived in several countries. I lived in the UK. I haven't actually seen my bank, the branch where my bank is, since the turn of the century. So with things like Revolut and TransferWise and remote banking, and even when I lived in Canada, I was banking with the Royal Bank of Canada, but I had a private banker that would come around to my office, and I did everything online. I actually never visited the branch where my account was at. So you don't, as I said earlier, you don't necessarily need to be where you are at. So if you're living in the Algarve in Portugal, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a Portuguese bank account. You can keep bank accounts everywhere. So what some of the things that clients are looking at is, I want to get accounts outside of my current country, whether that's the US or the UK or wherever. In Canada, because I don't want to have the Canadian government be able to close out my Canadian bank account. The American government tax my US bank account. The UK, changed the rules to try to tax that. So we often diversify, just as we diversify the person's residence and citizenship portfolio. Mm-hmm. We diversify their asset portfolio. And it doesn't mean, you look at what are the financial institutions, that will deal with me, what are the ones I want to deal with. You have a certain standard with regards to online banking and segregated accounts and types of services you're available. So, and do I trust, you don't necessarily want to go to David and Angelo's, bait, tackle, shop, and bank. You'll want to have a financial institution which has got a rating and which you trust and which has the services you have and which is going to be in a jurisdiction and you're going to diversify amongst several jurisdictions, and you're going to have, whether that's on your phone or in your wallet, you're going to have several bank accounts that you can access, so that if you get debanked by one, you've still got access to monies in other accounts.
And it's almost hard for me to go an episode without mentioning it. So I am just going to mention one word, Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. Really not your keys, not your Bitcoin. So I don't mean in an ETF or some kind of a centralized account, but literally you have the keys, you control it in your head or somewhere else, and you travel the world with that resource. But that's going to indirectly come up in a comment I'm going to make shortly in a second. Heading to a little bit of the home stretch, we're going to cover two interesting topics relative to, and a little off the beaten path slightly, with John Wick, and a little bit on Trump and his conversations about Canada and Greenland. So we'll add maybe a little bit of a unique element to it. But right before I get to that, and I'm keeping an eye on any audience interaction and questions as well, what's the biggest mistakes that wealthy individuals, families make when looking to secure what I would call maybe global mobility?
They ignore they go to the salesperson who's selling them a product. You as opposed to an unconflicted architect. I work with a team of architects, with local tax lawyers, family law lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a whole industry out there of what I'll call brick salesmen. So if you want to build a house, especially if you live in an earthquake or hurricane zone, if you want that house to protect your family, you don't go to the Home Depot and talk to the brick salesman, because they'll just sell you the brick that pays them the highest commission. Is it the right brick? Is it not? Is this going to, hold up? I don't know. It just pays me the highest commission. But they're excellent marketers. And so one of the big mistakes that people have is that they either try to, we've scratched just the surface of how complex some of these things are. And if you do it wrong, the cost. This is not a DIY project. This is not a project that you get free advice from your brick salesman. So get proper advice, understand what you're going to do, get a plan that's going to work, and make sure that you design it and execute it properly in an integrated fashion. If I call myself a tax savvy immigration advisor or an immigration savvy tax advisor, if I'm not doing getting rid of residence, citizenship, and domicile as part of a plan appropriately for an expatriation or a move abroad, or in preparation for a family law squabble in the future, I'm a dangerous character. Likewise, you don't want to have it siloed. You want to have everybody be very integrated. So we work a lot with wealthy families and family offices and private client advisors, and it's as part in a collaborative method, as part of a team.
Of course. And I guess I should also bring up, especially for those interested in non-Americans, that the USA is absolutely, for the right individuals and families looking internationally, an option. So obviously the US has rule of law. It has an incredibly powerful military, has an incredible tech scene, is incredibly, compared to my experiences in Europe, very, very entrepreneurial, and not full of, for the most part, bureaucracy relative from a business building perspective. It has
and great educational institutions.
Yeah. Okay. I might have some comments on that one, but let's go with relatively broadly yes, and maybe we could do a debate on that one a little bit later. Not today.
Well, Stanford Tech, MIT.
I'm being a little. Oh yeah, MIT is of course an exception. Well, of course we have great universities. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying it's that sometimes gets complicated, and I do believe the world of education, in a fast-paced world of AI, technology, robotics, 3D, and drones, well, less so drones, will all be changing radically in the relatively near future, the next 5 or 10 years. So stay tuned. And we're not a part, like many of the other countries we mentioned, we are not a part of the CRS, the Common Reporting System, where, now, again, you shouldn't be hiding anything anyway, but if you think that even going to Switzerland or Singapore, that your stuff is private from other countries per se, depending on a variety of factors, you are wrong. And again, I'm not saying you're looking to tax cheat or anything like that, but for those of us that are more libertarian, that like to keep our stuff private, the fact that things may be shared is not exactly an attractive trait. So there are definitely, I could think of the uniqueness of the states in the United States. I could think of a South Dakota with incredible privacy banking, LLC laws. I could think of our Mississippi River, which gives us probably the world's greatest farming and access to water and resources. The US has massive advantages, and there are way more people that would love to come in than are leaving. So I always do have to bring that up because it's very true. I do want to cover two other subjects. So maybe for non-Americans that are looking at the US, but maybe don't want to necessarily become tax tied into the US, how could they develop access and resources within the US and then consider they may want to do a green card or a citizenship in the future?
Well, I've actually done a white paper on this and quite a bit of work. So if you go to my website, I'm sure, Angela, you're going to post the website somewhere and go into the white papers, you'll see how to integrated immigration and tax planning on foreigners coming into the US. Because as I said, when you're arbitraging jurisdictions, the US has a lot, and you just named a bunch of them, advantages. So how do I take advantage of those things in the US and avoid the disadvantages? And so we look at integrated tax and immigration strategies there. And actually, I've developed an e-learning program that we do for family offices, both on Americans looking out and foreigners coming in. And so again, if anybody's interested in that, they can contact me and we can get that. We do a webinar and free e-learning and CLE on that. But basically what often happens is, I'll give you an example. We had a South African family who generation one had gone to Mauritius, small island, but a very tax favorable access to South Africa, but it's a small place. And generation two was in South Africa, and as a result of the recent election, they decided, no, we're done with South Africa. Generation two wanted to move into the United States because they had businesses and schools and kids and stuff. And generation one said, well, we want access to our children and grandchildren. So they said, get us a green card. He said, well, hold on. What do you want with regards to the US? Oh, we want access to our children and grandchildren. Okay, well, the children and grandchildren can get green cards and go on and get citizenship. That's not where the family wealth is. Family wealth is with G1. So in that case, we ended up moving them to what I call the lower East Side, Bermuda. And the generation one flies in and out. They said, well, we wanted to have more than simply a visitor. Fine, we got them an L1 intracorporate transfer that gives them preferred access. They've got global entry. They zip through the airports. They just need to make sure that they count their days so that they don't trip the substantial presence test, and if they do, that they are in a position to do a closer connections rebuttal of that and manage it. So we filled all the needs without exposing of each family member, without exposing the family wealth to taxation. And we put in complex plans to deal with generational skipping tax and all these other things. So again, it's develop an integrated, sophisticated plan and execute it properly.
Of course. And David, as we're taking it to the home stretch, a little off the beaten path of the core subject, but would love to get your opinion, especially with your Canadian heritage. What do you think about Trump talking about Canada becoming effectively a state of the US? And maybe a little bit more of the serious one, Greenland. Any specific perspective, what you're hearing internationally, as well as your own opinions?
Greenland is very strategically important. With the polar ice cap melting, the Northwest Passage is going to be a major thoroughfare for cargo and military in the future. Access to, you mentioned water. Those glaciers are melting. They are melting, whether you think it's man-made or not, they're melting. So, what's causing the melting is kind of irrelevant to the fact that they're melting. And so that's access to water. There's also, in today's modern economy, access to, certain types of metals and resources that Greenland has access to. So again, the United States has a lot of reasons to be able to have military there and access to those things. Do they need to own it to do that? No, if I'm the president of the United States and I'm saying, okay, I'm going to invade Greenland, or I'm going to invade, I want access to military and the resources of a Canada or a Greenland. I've got two choices. Option one is I can say, okay, I'll go buy it in the open market. They'll produce it for me. They'll refine it for me. They'll even give me guaranteed delivery. Or I can invade, have, blood and treasure on spending that. All the locals are going to leave, so I got to import Americans to do the refining and all these other things, and I got to put more military to protect them because the locals are going to take pot shots at me. So he obviously recognizes the importance of a place like Greenland, and he's using this kind of negotiating contract, but he doesn't need to own it to do that. And the Greenlanders are small, 35,000 people. They don't particularly like the Danes for a bunch of historical reasons. And so if they gain independence, there's nothing to stop them from setting up a very strategic arrangement to give the US everything it needs without owning it or invading it. With Canada, he's threatening, I grew up in Windsor, Detroit, child of the auto industry. So the importance of the trade agreement between the trade between Canada and the United States is quite important. His negotiating technique is to claim a big tariffs. Okay, well, what are the two things that the United States is going to need very quickly? 40% of the gasoline used in the United States come from Canada. Softwood lumber. You got to rebuild Los Angeles. You're gonna, and tariffs aren't paid by Canada. Tariffs are paid by the importer. And so that's going to cost for that construction company rebuilding that house in Malibu. They got to get lumber, and they're going to get it and say, well, to develop American industries. Well, there's only so many American forests. And so they're going to, and how quickly is it going to be? And your costs are going up. So it's a negotiating technique to me, but he does recognize the importance of getting access to certain things that are important to the United States geopolitically.
Indeed. And there is a question that came in before I get to my final comment question from Chad. David, what do you see your clients use as their global structure? Meaning like Cook Islands Trust, Cayman Trust, St. Kitts Foundation, Liechtenstein, or Switzerland Foundation?
Depends on what they're trying to achieve. So Nevis and Cook Islands are kind of the go-to for asset protection and things. There's pros and cons of each. Cook Islands time zone, Nevis is a pretty small place. We often do a combination of, for example, in a structure, we'll call it, use the technical term here, bucket. What's the most appropriate bucket? That may be a trust, that may be a foundation, that may be an LLC. There's a number of different things that you could use as a bucket. Then how do you do that? How do you guard against the guardians? How do you make sure your trustee is not, emptying the bank account, or the person running the foundation, or the banker? Is you have, things like protectors, etc. So it's often a combination of a structure which is in one jurisdiction, which is administered in another jurisdiction, and the assets of those are custodian somewhere else, and who's deciding to buy or sell, Apple or Nvidia, that decision is made somewhere else, and where the beneficiaries are of that, or who you're protecting against. For asset protection, interestingly, people think of somebody slipping and falling on their sidewalk or being sued by a third party. That's not the major asset protection issue. Everybody gets married, thinks it's forever, and half of us are wrong. So I pick on I've got 10-year-old twins, a boy and a girl. Statistically, one of them is going to get divorced. If I had to bet, I'd say my daughter, because she already thinks the bad boys are cute. So let's fast forward a couple of decades, and she's married somebody, and it's not working out. And she could have two conversations. One is, honey, I know we're getting married in a couple of weeks, but I need you to go get independent legal advice on this prenuptial before the wedding. Or, honey, sorry it didn't work out. I know you're expecting half of all my assets, but that SOB father of mine set it up in a trust when I was 6 years old, so you get half of nothing. That's the kind of planning that we do, things that will actually take into account real life. My first wife, she thought it was an insult. I thought it was untrue, but aspirational. She said, David, you look at the world like Mr. Spock from Star Trek. She thought it was without emotion. I thought it was logically and seeing the world as it really was. And so that's really what you want to do is, I'm getting married. Congratulations. That's great. 50% of the time that's going to end in divorce. And so it's not going to be some mystery third party. It's going to be your future daughter or son-in-law that are going to attack the family wealth. So you want to make sure that you've got your succession planning and your asset protection planning to take into account what's the most probable event. Divorce is not a black swan event.
Indeed. Great comment. Maybe have a little bit of fun the last 2 or 3 minutes. I mentioned earlier John Wick, and I know it's a little off the beaten path relative to the core subject of today, but it relates to it. And by the way, I will be doing a program with an incredible guest kind of on that subject. And what I'm going to hint at now, I'm going to say about 2 more months, so be a little patient. And we'll be rolling out some specific content and solutions for this for my members coming up soon. So yes, I've enjoyed over the years rewatching many times the John Wick movie, and I found the concept of the sanctuary hotel to be interesting. Now, admittingly, that may take us down a dystopian, somewhat future. Are there going to be areas that are quote unquote safe haven sanctuaries? And would they specifically be a hotel, a community, a city, without necessarily, and don't think about it as being fixated in tax arbitrage in a given country? So a couple of questions that I would broadly bring up, or comments to bring up, and maybe we'll get some feedback from David. First of all, if things really get bad, how are you going to get there? So what's your onshore and your offshore plan? And what's your optionality for both communication and for transport? If you wait to plan this until the last second, maybe no matter how much money you have, none of it may matter at all. And I think that's basically a big picture that David also spoke about as well, in terms of preparation, about having optionality as opposed to waiting to the last second when it may not be available or the cost may literally skyrocket 10 or 100x, who knows? So it may not be fun to have to put in the work that you need to do now. And as General Dwight Eisenhower stated, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. What's a backup plan? What's an adaptation? How do you think creatively and think for yourself to know that your plan is not going to work out perfectly as you structured? Now, where I'm going to get maybe a little bit dark, and you do need to give some considerations to, is effectively liquidity. So do you think that having, and I'm making a number up, $100 million in the bank, $500 million in stock and brokerages and bonds, but David hinted at it, he hasn't been to a bank in like decades. Like, it's ledgered. Sure, it's your money for tax purposes, but what if something were to go terribly wrong? April 6th of 2024, just under a year ago, New York City had an earthquake. For about 30 minutes, getting in and out, and air flight was canceled. There was no access. Imagine if ATMs went down. Do you think banks literally have all this money at their fingertips? There are things that could go wrong. So what is true liquidity? Does it mean literally having cash and other quote unquote currencies on hand? Does it mean gold and art? Does it mean things that are barterable to barter with? Does it mean things like I mentioned earlier on Maslow's hierarchy in terms of optionality, in terms of shelter, food, and water? But if you're looking at liquidity and you think just because you're rich and it's all in banks and brokerages, that there's nothing that could happen with that, especially in the age of quantum, upcoming, of AI, of things that could go wrong, of centralized resources where it has a single point of failure and AKA government controls. So might there be something like a sanctuary city? And what gets you access to that? Is it necessarily going to be your money? There'll be multiple trillionaires, multiple, within the next 3 to 10 years, partially due to a variety of reasons, including AI. Therefore, you being so-called rich may not be enough. What value do you bring to those in power? And then that becomes interesting. So is true wealth a combination of liquidity that you can actually access, knowledge that you have? And is it the capability of building a network, a global network? And I think that's a problem with Americans. We're too insular to the amazing aspects of our own country. And having optionality around the world, having resources around the world, I think is very, very important. And never underestimate having a global network, rather being blunt here, of powerful people. And that does relate a little bit to the work that I do, to my travels around the world and meeting incredible people and families, and more work that I'll do this year for my members, kind of connecting these dots. So, David, I'm maybe putting you in a little bit of a weird spot because it is at least 1 degree off the beaten track in terms of the work that you do, but it intersects with it. Any specific comments on what I said, or anything you would add to it, or something to make people feel a little better?
So the key is optionality and protection. It's better to prepare for the coming storm when the waters are calm. So that may be, and it's going to be a combination of things. So one is, do I have a place? Is that place stocked with Maslow's, do I have a roof, access to purifying water, and do I have food? Then how do I get there? Then how do I have barter, etc.? So I'll give you an example. So for my own family, we had an event that occurred, that Putin invaded the Ukraine. And so Poland is kind of on the front line, although we're the furthest away from that. Where I'm at is literally where the NATO Navy comes out, where Kaliningrad is an hour and a half drive away, part of Russia. And so, when that happened, I happen to have, I have a brother-in-law who's the Polish representative to NATO in Brussels. So, and my father-in-law is a retired naval officer. So I have a little bit more insight and a little more awareness, but, we've got a Canadian and European passports. We've got a variety of places to go. And so I said, what is the first thing that Putin could do? Well, he could screw up the ATM systems. So let's get some cash. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's also during the time, there was a pandemic going on. So let's make sure that we have all those necessities, to sustain ourselves, that we have access to that. We have not just, the local currency, which is zloty, but we have euros and US dollars. So we have, fungible currency. So we don't have to rely, well, my credit card's not working, or the internet is not working. We've got assets, whether those are legal tender, or whether those are other assets that we have to be able to sustain ourselves in the short term. And we have the ability to go somewhere, and the ability to leave and go somewhere. And so it was a combination of all of those things. So the key is, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. If you look back 5 or 10 years, and the speed of changes is accelerating. So have a maximum optionality and look at all of the things that you just talked about. Residences and citizenships being one of them, having homes available to you, having them properly stocked, having everything from decentralized monies like crypto, to having a variety of different currencies. If you had German marks during the Weimar Republic, you needed a barrel full to buy a bread. So, you have to look at devaluation. You have to look at all of those different things, and your ability to kind of protect. No matter, one of the truisms is, no matter how wealthy somebody is or how poor they are, one of the basic things they want to do is protect themselves and their family. the wealthier you are, the more resources you have to do that. But you can have, if you don't do that smartly, you can be very wealthy, but not have protected it. You could be Jack Ma and all of a sudden disappear for a period of time. I had a early in my career, I had a family from Shanghai, and they said, "Look, we are kind of like the economic center of China." He said, "So we've seen the emperor, we saw the Taiping, we saw the boxers, we saw the Japanese, we saw the nationalists, we saw the Maoists, we saw the new communists. Our family motto is no matter how good things are, you always have a fast junk in the harbor, gold bars, and a second set of papers." And in the modern world, what that is you have access to be able to go and leave. You have papers to leave and to go where you reside, where you want are, and you have access to monies.
Yes.
So it's a modern version of that.
In just giving one word, yes. And again, the new age there would be something more specific, like Bitcoin, from a truly, we believe, decentralized. But just because you think that you have Bitcoin in an ETF, a fund, or a Coinbase, I mean, that's great. You're getting your feet wet. Hopefully you're making money, but that's all, that's not yours really. That's all centralized. You really, again,
It's like I can have a bank account, but unless I've got fiat currency in my hand.
Exactly. But that is where not your keys, not your Bitcoin. And I know some of you a little older, oh, Angelo, I don't know how to do that. It's too hard. Suppose something goes wrong. You got to learn. For my members, I have someone, it would take a little bit of consulting revenue from his perspective, but he's brilliant in terms of the work that he does with that. So those of you could reach out to me. But on that note, we are a bit out of time. David, it's been great to have you on. For those that would like to learn more about you and reach out or follow you on LinkedIn and your website, how could they do that?
They can go to my website, which is Lesperance Associates with a plural. So with an S.com. So lesperanceassociates.com. I am David at lesperanceassociates.com. I would encourage them to follow me on LinkedIn, both on me personally, and we have a firm website. I post often once or twice a day on various topics, such as the Spanish putting 100% tax and closing their program. Look around the website. You'll see a lot in the white papers. I mentioned the Coming to America. There's also American tax and immigration issues for Americans who are going to reside abroad or those who are going to do expatriations. There's lots of blogs that I think you'll enjoy. And go to the media section. I'm quoted in everything, basically every major financial publication or regular publication. So have some fun and look around there. And if they want to have more information, if you are an advisor to private clients or a family office, reach out to me. As I said, we have a specialized, again, it's free webinar, so we can get your team up to speed and provide an e-learning with continuing education credits.
Excellent. And by the way, David's last name is spelled Lesperance. It's great to see David, although digitally. Hopefully one day, after all these many years, David, in person. When I was in Europe and Austria, primarily about a year ago, I probably should have reached out a little prior, but my bad on that. And for my members, happy to make a direct and very personal, and some would say favorable introduction direct to David. You only have to ask. On that note, everyone, I'm Angelo Robles. I welcome you and hope you enjoy this. This was for my members and select guests today. It'll be non-public on YouTube. I'll make it more public and probably put it up on LinkedIn in about 2 or 3 weeks. But the ability to hear it in the moment and to interact with our guest and not have any edits to it. And there are some things that we have said, not necessarily in this conversation, but others that we do elect to keep out of more public platforms. So you get it in its raw environment in something like this. Go to @FamilyOffice and even @FamilyOffice TV on YouTube and subscribe to my platforms. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and my website is simply my name, AngeloRobles.com. And we do encourage, as a family of wealth and resources or a family office, to simply join, be a part of my membership at SFO Continuity and get the full breadth of everything that we do, my connectivity, including to people like David and many others, my proprietary resources, first access to things digitally like this. And this year, upcoming here in 2025, more than ever, I think I already mentioned my effectively 4-day program that I'm running in Palm Beach, late March. So join, jump in, be a part of it. The value that you'll get at that event alone is easily going to be worth the price of admission to be a member, let alone everything else that I provide. So I'm easy to reach out to. Angelo at AngeloRobles.com is my email. And a couple of weeks ago, I started to give, and it really is mine, it's not secondary, my direct number, so you could text me. And I was pleasantly surprised, and all good, although occasionally I get some hate, of very nice people that reached out, said hello, and all that's progressing very well. So that is 203-570-2898 here in the United States. And feel free to text me anytime. And again, go to AngeloRobles.com and learn more. Lots coming up. I'm going to Miami in 2 weeks. I'm speaking at an event, but mainly hosting some breakouts in Miami late January for family offices. If you're a family or a family office and around Miami during that time, hit me up, email or text. I could probably get you into that program. We're going to touch upon this subject of sanctuary cities, liquidity, and I'm going to give a breakdown of what I said about April 6th of 2024 in New York and how it could have played out in a negative way if it was a little worse or a follow-up earthquake and things went wrong, and basically play out the what-if scenarios. So we're in for a lot of fun. Thank you all. And as always, thank you, David. David, thank you so much for being a great guest. Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you, everyone.